Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Explore Everything. Today we step into the dangerous world of one of America's most feared and famous mobsters, John Gotti, a man who ruled the streets of New York with style, strategy, and ruthless power. Known to the public as the Dapper Don for his sharp suits and flashy appearances, Gotti wasn't just another gangster. He became a symbol of organized crime in the late 20th century. John Joseph Gotti Jr. was born on October 27, 1940, in the South Bronx, New York City, to a large Italian-American family. He was the fifth of 13 children, raised in a working-class environment where money was scarce, and the streets were often the only place to learn survival. His father, John Sr., worked as a day laborer, but despite his hard work, the family constantly struggled financially. This environment shaped young John's mentality early on. He realized that power and respect didn't come from a job, they came from the streets. From a very young age, Gotti developed a fascination with local gangsters who ruled the neighborhood with flashy clothes, expensive cars, and intimidating presence. They weren't just feared, they were admired. To John, they represented strength, influence, and a way out of poverty. He started skipping school regularly and spending more time hanging around with street gangs in Brooklyn, particularly near Fulton Rockaway, a tough neighborhood where organized crime had deep roots. By the time he was a teenager, Gotti was already involved in petty theft, gambling, and gang fights. His natural charisma and willingness to take risks made him stand out among his peers. He wasn't just a follower, he showed signs of leadership even in those early years. He became part of a gang known as the Fulton Rockaway Boys, which often carried out criminal activities like truck hijackings and robberies, early signs of the criminal empire he would one day control. His run-ins with the law started young. At just 14 years old, he was arrested for the first time. Instead of being scared straight, this only strengthened his bond with the criminal world. He saw arrest not as a failure but as a rite of passage. By 16, he had dropped out of high school entirely and dedicated himself full-time to street life. During these years, Gotti came into contact with members of the Gambino crime family, one of the most powerful mafia families in America. The mob controlled much of the activity in New York's neighborhoods, from illegal gambling to union rackets, and they noticed Gotti's loyalty and street smarts. He started as a low-level enforcer, running errands and carrying out small tasks for higher-ups, a stepping stone into a world where violence, loyalty, and ambition determined your destiny. Gotti's reputation grew quickly. He had a short temper, wasn't afraid to use his fists, and had a sharp instinct for survival. But more importantly, he learned how the mafia worked from the ground up, the codes of silence, the hierarchy, and the unwritten rules of respect and power. His early life wasn't about luck. It was about absorbing the street culture, positioning himself, and earning his place in a dangerous world where only the bold survived. As John Gotti moved from street-level crimes into more serious operations, his path began to cross more frequently with members of the Gambino crime family, one of the most powerful of New York's notorious five families. The Gambinos controlled a vast network of illegal enterprises, extortion, gambling, construction rackets, loan sharking, and influence over key labor unions. For a young man like Gotti, this wasn't just a criminal network, it was a ladder to real power. In the 1960s, Gotti officially began working under Carmine Fatico, a Gambino captain who operated out of the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Ozone Park, Queens. This social club became Gotti's training ground, a place where mob deals were made, respect was earned, and loyalty was tested daily. Here he learned how the mafia operated at a higher level, structured, disciplined, and far more dangerous than street gangs. He quickly rose from a mere errand boy to an enforcer, tasked with intimidating debtors, collecting payments, and ensuring that the family's operations ran smoothly. Gotti showed a rare combination of bravery, sharp thinking, and ambition. Unlike many others, he didn't just follow orders blindly, he understood the business behind the crime. This made him stand out to his superiors. His involvement in truck hijackings became especially profitable. At one point, he led a crew that specialized in hijacking cargo trucks at JFK Airport, stealing valuable goods and reselling them on the black market. This wasn't just petty theft anymore, it was organized, profitable, and strategically planned. However, his rapid rise didn't come without consequences. In 1968, Gotti's hijacking operations caught up with him, and he was sentenced to prison for several years. But even behind bars, he didn't lose status. On the contrary, his willingness to take the fall without betraying anyone earned him deep respect within the family. When he was released in the early 1970s, he returned to Ozone Park as a made man-in-waiting, with a stronger reputation than ever. By the mid-1970s, Gotti's loyalty and violent efficiency were rewarded. He was officially inducted into the Gambino family, taking the Mafia oath of omerta, the code of silence. Shortly after, he was promoted to capo regime, captain, giving him command over his own crew. From here, Gotti controlled a powerful faction of soldiers and associates, managing bookmaking rings, loan sharking operations and extortion rackets. His crew became known for both profit and fear. Anyone who crossed them paid a heavy price. Gotti's crew operated like a mini-empire within the Gambino network. He handled disputes decisively, maintained discipline, and made sure the money kept flowing up the chain to the bosses. His ability to mix brutality with business sense made him invaluable. He was no longer just part of the mob. He was becoming a force within it, steadily climbing the ranks, eyeing positions of greater power. By the mid-1980s, John Gotti had climbed to one of the highest positions in the Gambino crime family, but at the top sat Paul Castellano, the official boss. Castellano was a powerful but controversial figure. Unlike the traditional street-hardened mobsters, Castellano was more of a white-collar don. He focused heavily on business operations, construction rackets, and labor unions rather than street-level violence. While this approach made him wealthy, it also created friction with the more traditional tough-guy mobsters, including Gotti. Many within the family felt Castellano had lost touch with the streets, and his increasing isolation, combined with favoritism toward his close circle, fueled resentment. Gotti, a man of the streets, felt undervalued and overlooked, especially after his close friend and mentor Aniello Delacroce, the Gambino underboss, passed away in 1985. Delacroce had long been a bridge between Castellano and the street crews. With him gone, tensions boiled over. Castellano made a fatal mistake. He did not attend Delacroce's funeral, a sign of deep disrespect to the street faction of the family. To men like Gotti, this was more than an insult, it was a betrayal. Around the same time, Castellano was facing indictments on racketeering charges, and there were whispers that he might cooperate with law enforcement if it benefited him. For Gotti, this was a dangerous risk. He believed Castellano's leadership endangered the entire family, and more importantly, his own power. What happened next was one of the most daring and public mafia hits in American history. On the evening of December 16, 1985, Castellano and his new underboss, Thomas Bellotti, arrived outside Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan. As they exited their car, a team of Gotti's gunmen, dressed in trench coats and Russian-style hats to disguise their identities, opened fire in the middle of a busy street. Castellano and Bellotti were gunned down in a precision ambush, shocking onlookers and making headlines nationwide within hours. The Sparks hit wasn't just another mob killing, it was a public execution of a mafia boss in one of New York's busiest areas during rush hour. It broke traditional mafia protocol, which usually demanded approval from the commission for such moves. But Gotti's boldness and planning paid off. The hit was executed flawlessly, and within days, Gotti began consolidating power behind the scenes. Law enforcement immediately suspected Gotti's involvement, but there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime. Witnesses described the shooters but couldn't identify anyone. Meanwhile, inside the Gambino family, the street soldiers rallied behind Gotti, viewing him as the man who had taken decisive action when others hesitated. Within a few short weeks, John Gotti was named the new boss of the Gambino crime family, marking the beginning of his reign. The murder of Castellano wasn't just a power grab, it was a calculated, strategic strike that demonstrated Gotti's willingness to defy tradition, take risks, and eliminate anyone in his path. This single event transformed John Gotti from a powerful captain into the most feared and talked about mob boss in America, setting the stage for the Dapper Don era. When John Gotti took over as boss of the Gambino crime family, he didn't just change the power structure of the mafia, he changed its image. While traditional mob leaders operated from the shadows, avoiding public attention at all costs, Gotti embraced the spotlight like a celebrity. Almost overnight, New York City's media became obsessed with him. Newspapers splashed his photos across their front pages, TV stations covered his court appearances like red carpet events, and the public, fascinated by this larger-than-life figure, followed his every move. Gotti wasn't hiding in dark alleys, he was walking confidently into courtrooms wearing $1,000 hand-tailored Italian suits, with silk ties, shining shoes, and perfectly styled hair. This earned him the nickname, the Dapper Don. Gotti loved this attention. Unlike the secretive bosses before him, he leaned into his public persona. He was often seen leaving courts smiling, waving to crowds, and making short, confident remarks to reporters. He carried himself like a movie star, always calm, charming, and composed even when facing serious criminal charges. For many in the public, he became a symbol of defiance, power, and style, almost like a real-life gangster from a Hollywood film. What made this image even more powerful was his reputation for beating the system. Throughout the late 1980s, Gotti faced multiple trials, including charges of assault, racketeering, and murder conspiracy, but time and again he walked out a free man. Jurors were bribed or intimidated, witnesses refused to testify, and prosecutors couldn't make their cases stick. Each acquittal only boosted his legend further, and the media crowned him the Teflon Don, because no charges seemed to stick to him. This combination of danger and glamour made Gotti unlike any other mob boss in modern history. Some New Yorkers even admired him for standing up to the government, seeing him as a rebellious figure who lived by his own rules. Crowds would gather outside the courthouse to cheer him on as if he were a famous athlete or rock star. He became a pop culture phenomenon, mentioned in late-night talk shows, movies, and newspapers nationwide. But this high-profile image had a double edge. While it boosted his fame, it also attracted intense attention from law enforcement. The FBI, prosecutors, and media watched his every move. Every suit he wore, every smile he gave outside a courthouse. It all fed into his myth and, simultaneously, the determination of authorities to bring him down. Still, during this period, Gotti relished his role as the public face of the Mafia. He was not just running a criminal empire, he was branding it. And in doing so, he turned himself into one of the most recognizable figures in American organized crime history, a gangster who walked and talked like a king. Once John Gotti rose to the top of the Gambino crime family, he didn't waste a single moment in establishing absolute control. He ruled with a combination of strategic intelligence, iron-fisted discipline, and calculated violence. Gotti understood that being boss wasn't just about wearing expensive suits and enjoying fame, it was about commanding fear and loyalty at every level of the organization. The Gambino family under Gotti was a massive criminal machine. It was involved in illegal gambling, loan sharking, drug trafficking, extortion, hijackings, and construction rackets throughout New York City and beyond. At its peak, the family was estimated to earn hundreds of millions of dollars each year. Every crew, every soldier, and every associate was expected to kick up a share of their earnings, ensuring that money flowed steadily to the top, to Gotti himself. To keep this system running smoothly, Gotti operated like a military commander. He rewarded loyalty generously but punished betrayal or weakness without hesitation. He personally selected trusted lieutenants and capos to oversee key operations, ensuring no one could move against him easily. Gotti made his presence felt constantly, holding meetings at the Rave Night Social Club in Little Italy, where he would summon soldiers and capos to discuss business, settle disputes, or deliver orders. When Gotti spoke, no one interrupted. His word was final. But what truly made Gotti's leadership feared was his ruthlessness. Anyone who crossed him, disrespected his authority, or threatened the stability of the family was dealt with swiftly, often fatally. Under his rule, murders were carried out with precision. Rivals, suspected informants, and even members within the Gambino family who were viewed as disloyal were eliminated. Gotti was known to personally approve hits, ensuring that every act of violence served a purpose, to strengthen his power and keep everyone in line. He also enforced a strict code of conduct. Gambling operations had to run clean, payments to the family were non-negotiable, and anyone suspected of dealing with law enforcement faced severe consequences. This uncompromising stance made him both respected and feared. Even those outside the Gambino family, rival crews, businesses, and corrupt officials, understood that defying John Gotti came with a price. At the same time, Gotti maintained his image as a charismatic leader. He was known for his quick wit, sharp tongue, and ability to make even hardened criminals feel valued when it suited him. He balanced fear with calculated charm, creating an environment where people didn't just obey him, they believed in his power. Through this mix of strategy, violence, and personal presence, John Gotti turned the Gambino crime family into the most dominant mafia family in America during the late 1980s. His control was total, his authority unquestioned, and his ruthlessness legendary. By the late 1980s, John Gotti had become public enemy number one for U.S. law enforcement. His bold rise to power, his open presence in the media, and his repeated courtroom victories made him a symbol of defiance against the justice system. For the FBI, Gotti wasn't just another mob boss. He was a personal challenge, a man who embarrassed prosecutors and made the system look weak every time he walked out of court smiling. The FBI launched an unprecedented campaign to bring him down. Multiple agencies, including the Organized Crime Task Force, federal prosecutors, and New York detectives, joined forces in a coordinated effort. The Bureau understood that traditional methods weren't enough. Gotti was too smart, too insulated, and surrounded by layers of loyal soldiers who acted as buffers between him and criminal activities. One of the biggest breakthroughs came when the FBI decided to attack his operations from the inside, not just by following street-level crimes, but by listening to his private conversations. They began a massive surveillance operation, placing hidden microphones and bugs in locations connected to Gotti and his top men. The most famous of these was inside the Rave Night Social Club, Gotti's headquarters in Little Italy. For years, the club had been considered untouchable, a place where mobsters came and went, always careful, always guarded. But the FBI managed to install sophisticated listening devices in the building, including one in the apartment above the club, where Gotti held his most sensitive meetings. Through these recordings, the FBI began to unravel the inner workings of the Gambino family. Gotti's habit of talking freely, combined with his confidence that the club was secure, led to hours of incriminating conversations being captured. He discussed murders, discipline within the family, money operations, and even voiced frustrations with some of his own men. Every word became evidence. Simultaneously, the FBI intensified its informant recruitment, quietly pressuring lower-level associates, rival crew members, and even people close to Gotti to cooperate. They mapped out his structure, who reported to whom, how money flowed, where meetings were held. It was a methodical dismantling of his empire, brick by brick. As the evidence mounted, prosecutors watched closely as Gotti continued to beat case after case, including high-profile trials where jurors were tampered with or intimidated. Each acquittal only made the FBI more determined. They understood that to take Gotti down, they needed an airtight case, one built on his own words and insider betrayal, not just circumstantial evidence. The turning point came when the FBI began focusing not only on Gotti, but also on his inner circle, the men who stood closest to him. By identifying vulnerabilities among his trusted allies, the FBI was setting the stage for a devastating betrayal that would finally crack his untouchable image. By the early 1990s, the walls were closing in on John Gotti. Years of FBI surveillance, undercover operations, and meticulous evidence gathering had built a powerful case. But what truly sealed his fate was something Gotti had never expected: betrayal from within his own inner circle. The key figure in this betrayal was Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, Gotti's trusted underboss and longtime ally. Gravano was a feared enforcer and had personally overseen numerous murders for the Gambino family. For years he was fiercely loyal to Gotti, carrying out orders without hesitation. But when faced with overwhelming charges including racketeering and multiple murders, Gravano made a decision that shocked the criminal world. He turned government witness. Gravano's testimony was devastating. He provided prosecutors with first-hand accounts of Gotti's leadership, detailing murders, meetings, orders, and inner workings of the family structure. Combined with the secret FBI recordings from the Rave Night Social Club, where Gotti was overheard discussing hits and criticizing his men, the evidence was overwhelming. The man who once seemed untouchable had left a trail that could no longer be denied. In December 1990, Gotti was arrested in a dramatic raid and charged with racketeering, murder, illegal gambling, obstruction of justice, and a list of other crimes that painted him as the ruthless head of America's most powerful mafia family. His trial in 1992 became a media sensation. Reporters flooded the courthouse daily, cameras flashed, and crowds gathered outside chanting his name, some cheering, some waiting to see the fall of a legend. Unlike previous trials, however, this time Gotti couldn't outmaneuver the law. The evidence was ironclad. Gravano's testimony alone placed him at the center of 19 murders, including high-profile hits. And the FBI's audio recordings captured his own voice giving orders, something prosecutors had never had before. On April 2, 1992, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty on all counts. John Gotti was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was a historic moment, the end of the reign of the man once known as the Teflon Don. His conviction sent shockwaves through the underworld, proving that even the most powerful mob boss could be brought down. Gotti was sent to U.S. Penitentiary Marion, a maximum security facility in Illinois, where he spent the rest of his life in near total isolation. Even behind bars, he maintained a sense of power and loyalty among some of his followers, but the Gambino family was never the same. Over time, Gotti's health deteriorated. In the late 1990s, he was diagnosed with throat cancer, and despite treatment, his condition worsened. On June 10, 2002, John Gotti died at the Federal Prison Hospital in Springfield, Missouri, at the age of 61. The man who once walked the streets of New York like a king, dressed in silk suits and commanding both fear and fascination, died alone behind bars, a stark contrast to the life of power and glamour he once lived. His downfall marked the end of an era for the American Mafia. Gotti's rise and fall became a story of ambition, defiance, betrayal, and ultimate justice. A reminder that even the most dangerous gangster cannot escape the reach of the law forever. John Gotti's story is more than just the tale of a mob boss. It's the rise and fall of a man who challenged tradition, defied the system, and embraced fame in a world built on secrecy. He ruled with charisma, calculated violence, and a sense of invincibility that captivated both the streets and the spotlight. But in the end, no empire built on fear and blood lasts forever. The same power that made Gotti untouchable also made him a target too big to miss. The FBI adapted, his inner circle fractured, and the law finally caught up. From the bustling streets of New York to the cold walls of a prison cell, Gotti's life serves as a reminder. No matter how high you rise, there's always a fall waiting if it's built on crime and betrayal. John Gotti lived like a king, but he died as a prisoner. A legend to some, a criminal to others, and a symbol of an era that would never be repeated.